Bro, how do you feel about this classic album, bro? This is another throwback review, man. How do you feel about Notorious B.I.G's debut album? Landmark debut at that.
Yes, landmark debut album. It's been out for 30 years. In September was the 30th
Crazy.
anniversary of Ready to Die by Notorious
Mm,
B.I.G. And man, let me tell you, this album is a classic if there ever was a hip hop
mm.
classic. This one is high on the list. It's not in my top five hip hop albums, but it's definitely in my top 20. It might be it might ensure towards top 10, top 15 to me. But
Yeah.
it's up there, man. There are some classic songs on it. I think it's a very versatile album,
Mm,
and it's one of those that has it really showed Biggie's range as an artist, and it really showed off his lyrical abilities and storytelling throughout this album. There are some songs on here to me that are some of the best storytelling records in hip hop history. When I think about "Warning" being one of my favorite storytelling rap songs, just because of how
mhm.
vividly he told the story. One More Chance being a smooth classic record that is always gonna stand the test of time. It's just one of those albums that just has it's not a lot of wasted space on it. It's one of those albums that is a landmark in hip hop history for me. And yeah,
Mm.
man, there's a lot of songs on here that I love. One More Chance, Warning, uh, you got to say Juicy, classic hip hop
Yeah,
song. Just one of those songs that is one of the songs you think about when you think of hip hop
for sure.
being juicy. Big Papa, another smooth classic, and I like this
Mm,
album too because it goes from smooth record to rugged, rough street
mm.
record, and it does so effortlessly to me. Machine Gun Funk being another classic. Like, it's this one is not it's not a lot of songs on here that I don't like,
Mm.
and one song that I think sticks out to me the most on this album, Suicidal Thoughts, man.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
What did you think about that record when you first heard it?
So like at first, when I first listened to this album, like as a teenager, I didn't really think much of it at the time. I think I wasn't primed or ready for this type of record. Like at first glance, you're like, oh, okay, this is just another kind of like moody, dark, like Biggie record among many that are on this song. It kind of just fits in, right? Like a glove. But when you really dig into the lyrics, you're like, hold on, bro. Like this dude, Biggie, he was probably 20, 21 making this album. He was this vulnerable in this on this record as you can be, like, especially during this time because it was rarely common, or was uncommon. So yeah, like I love it, and I love that he almost talks about like this subject in a way that the average man, especially at this time, could really comprehend it and still enjoy it. I think that's like something that I really took away from the project. What about you?
Absolutely, man. When I first heard Suicidal Thoughts, I was young, probably too young to be listening to a song called Suicidal Thoughts, to be honest. But
Mm.
I was a hip hop fan at a very, very young age. I was digging into some of these albums. And I remember when I first heard this, it was just unlike anything that I had heard before. And I think that hearing, it was so detailed, so vulnerable, such a um transparent. I'm not even gonna say transparent because I don't even know if he wrote the story from a place of actually being in a state or if he wrote it just,
Mhm.
he really just showed off his songwriting ability and just wrote a story. But either way, it was, you never really hear songs about suicide. Now you do, but
Yeah.
at that time, it was unheard of for an artist to make a song like Suicidal Thoughts. And I think
Mm.
that it really shows off how gifted Biggie was as a songwriter, and how he can really bring you into the pain and emotions that a person can feel in that mind state. So yeah, man, I think that song is one that I use in my classes today. I use that one in my socially conscious hip hop class when we talk about mental health and hip hop and how hip hop has spoken about mental health
Mhm.
issues such as depression, anxiety, depression. And I think that this is one where even though he doesn't necessarily use those terms, back then you didn't have a lot of artists who would use the terminology of depression or anxiety or
Yeah.
mental health or any of that. Those
Mm.
that they didn't use that vernacular, but they were
Mm.
still expressing those same emotions, just as artists in other genres such as blues were doing prior to that. So I think
Hmm.
it's yeah, man. I think this is one of those albums that I think has stood the test of time. It's aged well. Some of these songs you still hear out, like you'll still hear One More Chance get played at a
For
function.
sure.
Like you'll still hear Big Papa get played. Like I think that
Mm,
this album aged really, really well, which usually lets you know that it's a solid project. And I know that right now is not a optimal time to shout out Diddy, but I will say
mm,
he did his thing on this. The foresight and of using some of these samples on songs like a
mm,
Juicy and kind of getting Biggie to step outside of his typical gangster rap bag and make
yeah,
some of these softer songs, I think was a nice touch. So
for sure. And sprinkling them in like in sequencing them the way he did, because again, they're sandwiched in like some of these more deeply personal gangster, like kind of hard hitting records, right? Like, but they fit in seamlessly. Like that's the part that really shows, like, has a masterful touch for me is like the production itself, fire. And this is East Coast, like, hip hop that we're talking about that's 30 years old. While it sounds like that, right? Like it has remnants of that time period. It's a classic sound and it hits just right on the right musical notes for it to still have that lasting sting. Like if I introduce this album to somebody who was 18 years old, I guarantee you they'll still find enjoyment out of it in some way or another. Maybe not, who knows, whatever. But the point is, like, this is a certified classic for those reasons, because it has that timeless feel and sound to it. um and you can go back to a suicidal thoughts, for example, like I did in reviewing this album, and say to yourself, I usually would skip this song, but this hits harder for me than it did when I first heard it maybe a decade or 15 years ago. So yo, you're right. You got it right on the money. This is like a classic album. This is one of my maybe top. This is maybe a top 20 album. And I know that like may sound crazy to diehard Biggie fans, but this is so much music that hits me a lot harder given my age. But like you can't deny the mastery of this project, and the production on it, man. It's incredible.
yeah, and I would agree. I think that it's also your age is going to play a role and what you typically will put in your top 20. Now, I will say I can't put it fully on that because there are some songs that are in my top 10 that are older, that are
Hmm.
in 90s albums, but at the same time, um, we resonate with the messaging a little differently when it's
For sure.
when it came out when you were coming of age. So there's
Hmm.
going to be certain records that are going to resonate with me more. And for me personally, as somebody who is gravitates to more um conscious pro-black messaging, there's
Hmm.
going to be a lot of albums in that realm that fall above this album to me. Um,
Hmm.
but like I said, still a masterful album, still one of the greatest debut hip hop albums for sure.
Yeah.
And yeah, man, gone too soon, man. When you're talking about Biggie and Pac, man, it's really crazy to see how skilled they were at such a young age.
Hmm.
Even when you're talking about some of the artists who are still alive, like a Nas, like when you think about the fact that Nas was 20 when Illmatic dropped, like it's just crazy to imagine that they were that profound
Hmm.
in their thinking and masterful in their lyricism at such a young age. And same thing for Biggie and Pac it's amazing to see, and it's kind of like when you look at some of the newer artists, it'd be like, shame on
Hmm.
you because
Yeah.
you're 30 and trash.
You feel me? Yeah, like, and it's even wilder to think about and reflect on the fact that like Nas in eighth or ninth grade, he dropped out of school. You know what I'm saying? It's for him to have not only just the way he articulated himself, but the fervor in which he had, like the fire in which he did it. Like it, bruh,
That's
it's crazy, dog. It's
That's the
crazy.
same thing that I play. It ain't hard to tell for my students
Yeah.
about a little over a week ago, and one of my students said the same thing. He was he was like, it's crazy that he was this young and had a vocabulary like this because he was like, I couldn't even imagine myself putting together words in this way. Like
Hmm.
he was that young. He was like he's younger than I am now. So like
Right.
even one of my students was able to think that when listening to It Ain't Hard to Tell all of these years later.
Hmm.
almost 30 years later. And yeah, man, some of these artists, were they're really just musical and lyrical geniuses. Like, and when
Seriously.
you take some of these artists and you actually, if you just print out their, that's to me what lets me know that there's a artist who is a really great lyricist. If I could take your rap and print it out and show it to somebody in who's a poet or an English professor or any of these
Hmm.
people, and they could read it and still think it's profound without hearing you rap it, to me, that's another level of
It's
lyricism.
different. It's
And
different.
yeah, it's completely that's what lets me know that you're a great storyteller, and it doesn't even matter how that story is being consumed. It's you're just that great of a writer, and I think Biggie was that great of a writer for sure.
Absolutely. And he had a voice, he had a swag, he had a production behind him. It's just like he was the complete package, in a lot of ways. And I think that's why we still revere him as heavily as we do.